Bank of Korea leaves the key rate at 2.5% for now, but the market is looking at a rate hike later this year. The government says it's pumping an extra 7.8 trillion won into the Korean economy that's hurting in the wake of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. U.S. forces arrive in Nigeria to help the government there rescue the more than 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Islamist militants. Hello, everybody. I am Kang Tae-ri, and you're watching ARIRANG News at 8. Search operations are underway for those still missing in the ferry accident. And let's go straight to our Kim Ji-yeon, who has been following this story closely from the very beginning, of course. Ji-yeon, what we're learning today is again calling into question the initial response to the disaster.
That's right, Cherry. Findings suggest some victims tried to escape right before the ferry went under. Rescuers found bodies at a cabin on the 5th floor that was accessible only to crew members and was initially thought not to be occupied by any passengers. It is presumed that the victims fled to higher locations as water filled up the ferry. If the initial rescue attempt was better handled, these victims could have been saved.
This is heartbreaking, of course, to say the least. More so because we've been told that the captain and some of the crew did not even try to lead the passengers to safety.
What we learned today is that the first mate of the ferry told authorities earlier today that he had contacted the ferry operators several times, letting them know that the vessel was listening. And during those calls, which lasted for about a half an hour in total, the ferry operator did not even once mention the need to initiate an emergency escape for the safety of the passengers.
I see. Now, there is evidence that implicates Yoo Byung-eun, who was presumed to be the de facto owner of the ferry operator, was actually the real owner of the ferry operator.
Right. What's certain is that Yoo Byung-eun was active in running the ferry operator, going against his earlier claims that he was not involved. They found that the Cheongjin Marine Company paid Yoo around $9,800 a month in wages for nearly a year. And with this evidence, prosecutors are expected to charge Yoo for company mismanagement in upholding safety standards. They plan to summon him for questioning next week. I'll be back with more updates later today.
All right, thank you very much. And the tragedy has hit pretty much everyone in the country. And to address a rising economic impact from the disaster, President Park Geun-hye and her officials are seeking ways to contain them. Choi Yoo-sung reports.
Since the Sewol-ho ferry accident on April 16th, the Finance Ministry says a growing number of Koreans have stopped eating out, traveling, and engaging in various leisure activities. The sales growth of restaurants dropped 5 percentage points following the accident, and reservation cancellations have resulted in more than $30 million in losses for the tourism industry. This, coupled with unstable markets and exchange rate, prompted President Park Geun-hye to address the issue with ministers and businessmen on Friday.
지금은 국가적으로 매우 어려운 상황입니다. 이런 때일수록 국민들의 일상생활과 직결되는 민생을 챙기는 일에 적극적으로 정부가 나서서 대처해 나가야 할 것입니다.
Stressing how crucial it is to steady the recent economic recovery, the president called for measures to soothe weak sentiment. She then asked officials to offer much-needed support for the country's small and mid-sized businesses and the self-employed affected by the current crisis. To that end, the government will increase its second quarter spending by over $7 billion and offer affected businesses a total of some $70 million in financing at low interest rates. The businesses will also be allowed a grace period on their taxes. To help the people and businesses gradually resume normal business activities, the president said the government will have to come to some determinations about the Sewol-ho ferry accident.
다시는 이런 일이 일어나지 않도록 정부에서는 문제점을 찾아내서 바로 잡고 책임자들에 대한 처벌과 관련 사항을 상세하게 국민에게 밝힐 것입니다.
President Park also referred to a deregulation drive, saying efforts to root out unnecessary red tape must continue while bolstering regulations related to safety, consumer protection, and fair competition. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News.
The Seoul city government says it's replacing its old subway trains by 2020. Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon said today about $857 million will be spent over the next 8 years to replace about 36% of the city's nearly 2,000 subway cars. This comes 1 week after a subway accident in Seoul that injured close to 200 people, and faulty equipment was blamed for this accident. The city also says it's spending $1.8 billion to improve the subway system and safety. Korea's central bank left the key rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 12th straight month in May, calling the current interest rate sufficient to support the pace of economic recovery. But it also signaled a possible rate hike down the road. Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Despite government concerns that the pace of economic recovery is not strong enough, Korea's top central banker has made it clear that any future monetary decision would include a rate hike. While adding that it won't happen immediately, the Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said after a monthly monetary policy meeting on Friday that policymakers decided to keep the rate steady at 2.5% this month.
We believe the current 2.5% key rate is accommodative enough to back the economic recovery, and as far as I know, the market also shares the same view with us.
Over slowing consumer spending due to the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, the Bank of Korea governor says it's still too early to act, but adds that the bank is closely monitoring the impact on the domestic economy. Still, Lee maintained the bank's earlier growth forecast of 4% for this year, which matches up with the nation's potential growth rate. The governor went on to say that the impact local exporters are feeling from a strong local currency, which currently hovers at its highest level in nearly 6 years, is different from the past. Analyst Michael Na at Nomura in Korea also says that Korean companies have managed to improve their competitive edge, like Samsung Electronics producing top-of-the-line gadgets.
Because back in the old days, Korean companies competed on price. But a lot of the products that we sell these days aren't really price sensitive as it was before.
Fighting dangers of inflation exceeding the mid-2% range in the second half of this year, the top central banker said any changes to interest rates in the coming months would likely be an upward adjustment. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve says there is no timetable in deciding the proper size of the country's balance sheet. Chairwoman Janet Yellen did add that it could take the better part of a decade. Janet Yellen told a Senate panel that no decision had been made on the central bank's portfolio of assets, which has swollen to $4.5 trillion from about $800 billion in 2007. Yellen said the portfolio should start to shrink once the Fed decides to raise near zero interest rates.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Fresh off confirmation that North Korea was to blame for the 3 unmanned drones found earlier this year on South Korean soil, news that Kim Jong-un recently called for an expansion of the program. Kim reportedly ordered forces in March to utilize the drones not just for surveillance, but for attack purposes as well. That's around the same time that the 3 drones were discovered crashed in South Korea. The drones took hundreds of pictures of key military and government facilities in the south, and the north is believed to have flown dozens more back and forth across the border. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff condemned North Korea on Friday for the recent drone infiltration, calling it a violation of Korea's armistice agreement and their non-aggression pact. More vile comments out of Pyongyang. Instead of aiming their hate speech at the South Korean leadership, the target this time around was U.S. President Barack Obama. One day after North Korea's state media referred to President Barack Obama as a, quote, crossbreed and wicked black monkey, U.S. National Security Council spokeswoman Caitlin Hayden called the hate speech ugly and disrespectful. The White House usually ignores most of the propaganda out of North Korea, but responded quickly this time around. Pyongyang attacked South Korean President Park in similar fashion last month after her summit talks with President Obama. The United States is moving closer to reviewing South Korea's request to delay a transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul. The U.S. House Armed Services Committee has passed the National Defense Authorization Act of 2015. Among its many provisions, one calls for a review of the UPCON transfer issue currently scheduled for December next year. South Korea has been asking that the transfer be pushed back due to the continued North Korea threat. During their summit talks last month, the two leaders of the countries said they would reconsider the timeline. There is one view that the historic conflicts surrounding Japan's wartime sex slavery could throw the Obama administration's East Asia policy out of balance. That's according to a U.S. Congresswoman, too. Our Park Ji-won has the details.
U.S. Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez, the most senior female member on the House Committee on Homeland Security and the House Armed Services Committee, has warned that if historical conflicts in East Asia centering on Japan's wartime military sex slavery aren't settled quickly, it could disrupt the Obama administration's Asia rebalancing strategy. Sanchez made the remarks Thursday during a session of the House Armed Services Committee, according to a report by Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, quoting diplomatic sources in Washington. The Congresswoman said the sex slave issue has an inseparable relation to the U.S. government's Asia rebalancing strategy, which aims to strengthen political, economic, and security ties with Asian countries. She went on to say historic conflicts could weaken trilateral relations and the military alliance between the U.S., Korea, and Japan. She also stated that insensitive remarks by Japanese politicians hinder economic, political, and military cooperation among the three countries. Some prominent Japanese officials have claimed military sex slaves were necessary, or the victims were not forced into the slavery but were prostitutes. She added President Obama's recent remarks that Japan's wartime program of sexual slavery was a terrible violation of human rights should be understood in the context of trilateral cooperation. Visiting Korea late last month, the U.S. leader criticized Japan's wartime program of sex slavery, saying it was a terrible, egregious violation of human rights, and the past is something that has to be recognized honestly. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
The Korean wave is not news anymore, but the beauty of Korean celebrities and the products that they endorse are making money. Connie Kim reports.
The Korean wave, driven by Korean pop music and television dramas, has spilled over into the cosmetics industry. The Korea Customs Service said Friday that the export of domestic cosmetics increased sixfold since 2004 to more than $1 billion last year. The most popular items were skincare products, which make up nearly half of the market, followed by makeup products, including foundation and blush, at around 20%. The rise was also helped by an increase in the number of countries cosmetics were shipped to, from 87 countries to 129 nations over the last decade. Most went to Korea's neighbors in Asia, namely China, US, and Japan.
Our brand has in the past mainly targeted the East Asian market, nations like Vietnam and Singapore, but we plan to expand to the Northeast Asian market, including China. The Face Shop plans to continue promoting skincare products such as skin whitening cosmetics, which are most popular to foreign customers.
What's more, Korean cosmetic brands have been using celebrities for their advertisements, helping to boost brand awareness even further. The Korea Customs Service expects exports of cosmetics to rise even more in the years to come, adding that it's a moneymaker for all involved as the cosmetics industry has a high return compared to investment. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
South Korea's most recognizable brand is also one of the most desirable companies to work for in the world. Randstad, a human resources firm based in the Netherlands, ranks Samsung Electronics as the third most preferred workplace among global job seekers. Samsung Electronics followed BMW and Sony. 86% of them were aware of the brand, and over 57% said they wanted to work for the firm. Respondents from Canada, Hong Kong, and France had the most favorable view of Samsung, naming it the most attractive workplace in the world. The import auto industry enjoyed a strong month in April. According to the Korea Automobile Importers and Distributors Association on Friday, 16,700 automobiles rolled off new car lots last month, a more than 25% jump on year. In the first 4 months of the year, import car sales were up 26.6% in the country on year. The most popular choice among foreign car buyers in April was BMW, followed by Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen. U.S. State Secretary John Kerry says an American team of experts has landed in Nigeria to help the local government there to rescue the more than 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Islamist militants. With more on that story and other global headlines, we now go to Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, these militants appear to be taking bolder steps now. How are the authorities coping with the situation?
Well, it's becoming clearer to the world by the day that the Nigerian government is struggling to contain the extremist group Boko Haram. And residents of the latest known town to fall victim to the group's attacks are blaming security forces for failing to protect them. Our Shin Se-min reports.
In the latest evidence that the Nigerian government is losing its battle against the Islamic militant group Boko Haram, at least 50 bodies have been recovered in the Nigerian town Gamboru, victims of an attack carried out by Boko Haram. Surviving residents of the town say the death toll is more than 300, while government officials say the number is likely closer to 100. Residents of the town say they were bombarded by an assault that lasted 12 hours and lobbed criticism against security forces for failing to protect them. Most of the bodies found were burned so badly that they're beyond recognition. It's the latest in a series of violent acts carried out by Boko Haram. Last month, they abducted more than 200 girls and young women from a boarding school in the northeast of the nation. That sparked accusations that the government of Nigeria isn't doing enough to stop the extremists, which are blamed for killing more than 1,500 people so far this year as part of their drive to impose Islamic law on the country. A peaceful protest continues in parts of the country.
We want our girls back now. Now. We are not interested in any stories. Not even one girl is enough to get any mother, any parent, any father to stand up and be counted. This is a time for people, well-meaning people, to stand up and be counted in this country. For the sake of...
Experts say if the hundreds of Nigerian kidnapped girls are not rescued soon, they could face a life of agony as slaves or child brides sold in markets across the globe. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, certainly hoping that the U.S. team there will be able to help bring back these girls safely to their families. And now moving on to Thailand, Paul. Anti-government protests have erupted across the capital city there. Paul, what's the latest?
Well, thousands of anti-government protesters have been rallying on this Friday, 2 days after Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra was removed from office by the Constitutional Court. Though many see the ousting of Yingluck as a victory, they say it's not enough. The demonstrators are camped out in front of the government house, where many of the official offices of the Prime Minister are located. They're demanding a wide range of reforms and even calling on the caretaker government to step down. The massive group of demonstrators also want to postpone general elections slated for July 25th, as Yingluck's party is widely expected to win. Despite police firing tear gas and water cannons, protest leaders urge supporters to show restraint.
We are not the enemy of the police. Our enemy is only the Thaksin regime and the Shinawat family.
Tens of thousands of pro-government supporters are planning to stage a rally through the heart of Bangkok tomorrow, raising fears of violent clashes. 25 people have been killed since the anti-government protests began 6 months ago.
Now, turning to Ukraine, Paul, where ceremonies are being held across the country to celebrate Victory Day. Can you tell us about the significance of this national holiday?
Well, this marks the 69th anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Ukrainian political and religious leaders paid their respects to World War II veterans on Friday in Kiev, laying flowers at the Eternal Flame in the city's Heroes Park. On this solemn day, Ukraine's acting Prime Minister Alexander Turchinov said he would do everything to de-escalate the conflict with Russia, but said the pro-Moscow militants must face justice. The low-key ceremony was overshadowed by further unrest in the eastern part of the country, where pro-Russian separatists have seized scores of government buildings. The separatists have decided to push forward with a referendum on Sunday to split away from Kiev. Ukraine's top security chiefs have vowed to continue with anti-terrorist operations to take back eastern cities and stop the May 11th referendum.
The referendum in itself is nothing but political fraud, and it's only being used as propaganda by Russia. Now they have realized that propaganda is meaningless, so they have decided to actually put it off. I want to reiterate here, the government has no plan whatsoever for the referendum, and it never will.
The Ukrainian government has accused Russia of orchestrating the referendum and say the eastern cities do not have the right to hold such a vote.
And finally, before we let you go, Paul, weather authorities from around the world are warning that a shift in global weather patterns could trigger a stronger and earlier El Niño. That doesn't sound good.
That's right. Storms, droughts, floods, and more earthquakes are forecast in the coming months. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology says there's a 70% chance the warming of seawater in the Pacific could arrive as early as July. That conclusion was based on recent data that recorded temperature readings several degrees higher than previous years. The U.S. National Weather Service also predicts that the weather phenomenon known as El Niño will hit by November or December, if not earlier. This trend is also likely to affect wind patterns that could trigger extreme weather in different parts of the globe. That means longer droughts in Australia and increased hurricane activity in eastern Pacific regions. Climatologists say this year's El Niño could make 2014 the hottest year on record.
All right, Paul, thanks very much for that update, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Let's now get an update on the weather conditions with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, I understand that tomorrow is the last day of neap tides near Chindo.
That's right, and that's why conditions will continue to remain relatively calm. But beginning on Sunday morning, the things may take a turn, which will hamper rescue operations. Rain is in the forecast, along with a return of strong winds and high waves. Moving on to our current conditions, the nation continues to be under the influence of a high-pressure system from the West Sea, which is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. Now, this warm and wonderful weather, perfect for outdoor activities, should continue through tomorrow. But keep in mind that there looks to be a big temperature gap of about 15 degrees between the day and night, so make sure to dress accordingly. Otherwise, there looks to be rain on Sunday evening, which may continue through Monday morning. Taking a look at Saturday's readings, Seoul and Gwangju make it to 27 degrees, while Busan reaches 21. Moving on to other places, Jeju tops out at 22 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang peak at 16.
Hope you have a wonderful Friday night, and I'll be back with more after 10. And I'm signing off here as well. ARIRANG News returns at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.